I am so honored to have on the podcast today John Mackey, entrepreneur and co-founder of Whole Foods Market. In his 44 years as CEO of Whole Foods, the natural and organic grocer grew from a single store in Austin, Texas, to 540 stores in the US, UK, and Canada, with annual sales exceeding $22 billion. In addition to launching Whole Foods, John co-founded the Conscious Capitalism movement and co-authored the best-selling book, Conscious Capitalism, Liberating the Heroic Spirit of Business, as well as the follow-up book, Conscious Leadership. He is also the co-author of the Whole Foods Diet and the Whole Foods Cookbook. John currently serves on the board of directors for Conscious Capitalism, the Motley Fool, the Cato Institute, the Institute for Cultural Evolution, and Students for Liberty, and is pursuing his next business venture, Love.Life. John is the author of the brand new book, The Whole Story, Adventures in Love, Life, and Capitalism, which I highly recommend. John Mackey, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Carrie.
This is such a treat. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast to talk about your new book and share your perspectives on entrepreneurship. When I first read your book, Conscious Capitalism, several years ago, and again, when I recently read The Whole Story, I was struck by the similarities with the emergence of the natural foods movement that you were very much a part of and helped to accelerate through entrepreneurship, and the emergence today of the innovative education market that I spend a lot of my time spotlighting and supporting, in which entrepreneurial parents and teachers are creating new, more individualized, more joyful education options for young people across the US. So I'm excited to dive into your startup story because I think it will be both instructive and inspirational for the founders and prospective founders in my audience. So starting
Carrie,
with your startup
you might
story.
find this interesting. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you might find this interesting before you leave this point. Before I made a commitment to, this is not in my book and it's a story I seldom tell, but before I got into food, I was actually, at one point I was studying to be a teacher, and I was going to be an elementary school teacher, and I I really liked it. I love children, and I was, that time I was kind of an educational radical, and I was reading the books of that era, John Holt and Ivan Illich, and I definitely was thinking outside the box. I hated the bureaucracy of the public school system, and I might have gone down that path, but when I got into student teaching, the principal of that school, I had long hair, and I asked the students to call me John instead of Mr. Mackey, and I tended to eat lunch with the kids and not the faculty. And I was very effective in teaching kids how to read. But one day the principal asked me not to come back to his school any longer because I was a troublemaker. I said, I'm very effective. I'm doing the job. I'm helping these kids learn how to read. And he says, yeah, but none of the other teachers like you. You don't look like them. You don't dress appropriately. You don't eat with them. You're breaking all of our rules. And frankly, we prefer you not to come back. And that was the end of my my pathway to education. And I went the food route instead.
I love that story. I love that we share similar heroes, so John Holt and Ivan Illich. John Holt, of course, coined the term unschooling and was very much
Bird
a
Cole,
leader.
there was a ton of the people I read back in the day. They were talking about stuff, 50 years ago, 45, 50 years ago.
This reminds me of one passage from your new book, The Whole Story, that I'll quote from, where you say, quote, "The academic life with its prescribed programs and predictable outcomes just felt too constraining to me. I loved to think and I loved to learn, but I was no longer willing to read books someone else decided I should read. I still took classes that interested me and audited others, but I'd stopped trying to get a degree. So much for my dreams of following in the footsteps of the teachers I admired and making a career in academia. That life was not for me. Now my only curriculum was my own curiosity." This is when you talked about leaving college on your journey to entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear a little bit about what drew you to entrepreneurship. Back in your early 20s, in 1978, you and your girlfriend at the time, Renee, decided to launch Safer Way in Austin, Texas. What drew you on the entrepreneurial path?
Yeah. I wasn't really drawn on the entrepreneurial path. At least I didn't think of it that way. I was just very interested in natural and organic foods. I moved into this vegetarian co-op, a vegetarian commune, really, and uh, I had a food awakening. I learned how to cook. I became the food buyer for the co-op. But previous to that, I had just thought of food as like, I was like a car, and I would have to, I'd have to refuel from time to time to keep the body going. But I thought of it as just, eat the food that tastes good. And I didn't think about nutrition or health. Those were irrelevant. I just thought you just got to keep the engine running with good gasoline. Maybe there were slightly different, better grades of gasoline, but not that much difference. But when I moved into that commune, I started reading books about it, and I began to realize, oh my God, I'm a human being. I'm this living being, and food is not just fuel. It's nourishment. It's full of nutrients, and you've got to nourish tens of trillions of cells that make up the body. So then I got really excited about that. I went to work for a small natural food store. I became the food buyer for the co-op. So I mentioned previously, I learned to cook. I became a vegetarian. I hadn't been a vegetarian before I moved in there. And I just was passionate about this. I got very excited about it. And I remember coming back home after working one day, and I pitched my girlfriend that I'd met at the community, Renee, about whether said, I think it'd be fun to open a natural food store. What do you think about that? And she said, I think that'd be really cool. Let's do it. And so we did. And I often thought how my life might have been different if she'd said, that's a stupid idea. There's no way I want to do that. That's dumb. But she was excited about it. And so we launched it not thinking we were entrepreneurs, but or even that we were capitalists or anything else. It was an adventure. This will be fun. We get to create a store. It can be our store. We can earn a living. We can sell healthy food to people, and we can have a lot of fun doing it. We're very young. I started that when I was 24 and Renee was 20. So we were very idealistic and very enthusiastic. It was only later when I looked back and I thought, hey, I guess I'm an entrepreneur. I hadn't thought about myself that way before. And I didn't think about myself that way until looking backwards after a few years of doing it.
Interesting. Yeah, it's those three words, let's do it, that Renee responded. You say were just so critical in your path to building Whole Foods Market and on your entrepreneurial path. So you got to work to launch Safer Way. And in the whole story, you describe some of your early startup challenges, including one of your first encounters with regulatory roadblocks. You explain how in May 1978, a city official arrived at Safer Way as you and your friends were doing some renovations yourselves on the building, that you were trying to get the store ready to open. And this official asked you for building permits and licenses and clearances and all this paperwork that you hadn't yet secured. So you write in the whole story, quote, our business was doomed to fail before it had really gotten off the ground. There was simply no way we could hire a professional architect and a design firm and then sit around and wait months for city approvals. We'd be unable to pay rent. Our inventory would be out of date. The store would never open. Regulations like these seemed designed to keep upstarts like me and Renee from even trying. So, regulatory roadblocks are the main barrier to entrepreneurship confronted by the school founders I talk to, especially when they're trying to create new learning models, such as microschools and learning pods and homeschooling collaboratives that don't look anything like traditional schools. So take us back to that time when you encountered your startup roadblocks. How did you keep from giving up? And what advice would you have for other new founders encountering similar entrepreneurial barriers?
Well, I think I went down and talked to the city, and they told me what I had to do to get permission. And mm, we weren't going to be able to, we were going to run out of money. We weren't going to be able to do that. It was going to cost too much and take too long. And so I didn't know what to do, but coincidentally, the very day I came back, the afternoon I came back from talking to the city, the landlord that we'd rented the building from popped in to see how we were doing. And he was a Lebanese immigrant, and he had a thick accent, but he seemed really, really old to me at that time, but he probably was he might not have been any older than I am right now. And he just told me, he said, you know, John, if you're asking for permission from the city, you're not going to look at your store open. It's gonna, you know, but he said, don't be these people, these bureaucrats, they don't work past 5 o'clock. They go home. And so just do your renovations at night. You know, eventually they have to, you know, you have to do it to code. You'll have to pass inspections eventually, but getting permission ahead of time, I can see why that's not desirable for you. And so we didn't work during the day. We only worked at night, and we got it built. And you know, eventually we had to get we got all the permits that were required after we got open, more or less. So kind of the adage, it's better to ask for, it became an adage at Whole Foods, actually, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. And you shouldn't, and I think a lot of regulations are actually, big business goes along with it because they can afford to pay it, and it keeps out competition. It keeps out the innovators, or it makes it more difficult for them to innovate. It makes it too expensive. You see this really clearly, like in the pharmaceutical industry, for example. It's very difficult. I mean, it might cost you $1 billion to get a new drug through all the and years to get it through the regulatory agents. And so it's very difficult for a newcomer to even enter in. So the big companies just, they basically blocked off competition. So I think that happens in lots of different businesses. It's clearly true in the education business. When I think about what are the two most regulated businesses, well, the three most regulated businesses in the United States are education, health, and finance. And finance has become more regulated over time, not to the same degree medical and education are. And those are the areas where the United States lags. We lag other countries. We're not at the top. We're at the top in most industries, but not those industries. And I think it's because of regulations.
I agree. Yeah. And so you didn't ask for permission. You kept moving ahead with your plan to launch Safer Way, and that store was hugely successful. And so I'd love to
No,
talk.
Safer Way was not hugely successful. Safer Way was in an old Victorian house. Renee and I didn't know what we were doing. So we thought it'd be cool to do this store in an old Victorian house. And we had $45,000 in capital. We lost half of it in the first year, but then we made a small profit in year two. But by that time, I'd learned enough about business to understand that where our location and the size of our store were competitive disadvantages. We needed to relocate it. Also, we had too narrow of a product mix. We were vegetarians, tried to be really pure, no sugar, no caffeine, no alcohol. And consequently, we were not serving what the market really wanted. So once we relocated, changed the product mix up, got a bigger location, merged with another similar natural food store, and changed the name to Whole Foods Market, then we had explosive success. But Safer Way was so packed full of lessons for me as an entrepreneur that that's why that had to start with that store, Safer Way, rather than skipping right to Whole Foods.
Thanks for that clarification. Yeah, it was the first Austin store of Whole Foods that I believe you said was profitable right out of the gate.
Yeah, first day.
Yeah. So then you start to think about growth, right? And you have an entire chapter 9, called To Grow or Not to Grow. And you talk about that tension in the early days of building Whole Foods Market. You write about your conversation with your friend Mark saying, quote, "I want to build a company, not just own one great store. Whole Foods Market could be massive." You went on to say, we could change the way people eat in Texas, maybe in America. So I interview founders who may have opened one small school and are now considering opening another location or perhaps expanding into a broader network. They also want to create a thriving company, and many of them also have a bolder vision to help change the way people learn in America. So you encountered resistance from people who thought your vision was too grand and who said you should be content with one small store. What advice do you have for other founders who may be wondering whether or not they should grow?
It's really hard to say. I mean, it's hard to always speak for someone else. I think education is particularly difficult because of the funding questions. You got your competitor, the public school systems, got all this tax money coming in. And so somebody that is going to be a student of a private school they have to pay twice, right? They have to pay the taxes to support the public schools, then they have to pay um, um, for the private school as well. And that creates that's one reason sort of like the magnet schools or the schools that are what do they call the schools where people they're public but they're focused in certain areas of excellence.
Well, there's magnet schools that are run usually by the
Yeah,
district, but charter schools are
charter schools.
are
Thank you. That I'm
publicly
sorry.
funded,
That was
privately run.
the single
Yeah,
word that escaped me.
right.
So could be that just doing one school is I mean, I just wanted to grow. I thought it'd be
Mm.
fun. It was for me, the whole thing from the very beginning until this day has been an adventure. I was following my own inner guidance, my own heart, and going my own direction. And I felt called to do it. I wanted to do it. I did do it. But my partners didn't necessarily want to do that. I mean, one of my partners, we broke over it because our first store was so successful. He would have been happy never to do a second store because it was making so much money. As he said, we've made it. We're successful in life. We're going to make a lot of money, and let's just stay here and reap what we've sown. And when I wanted to grow, and some of the other new stores struggled, he was very angry with me about it, and he ended up leaving the company over it because he's so sure I was going to wreck the company that I was going to bankrupt. He wanted to get his money out before I did. So um, each individual has to decide whether, I mean, I think you can have a perfectly happy, contented life just taking care of students in one school, but others may have the bug to grow, and they may feel called to do it. And if so, I encourage them to do so. If you get one that's successful, you can replicate it and you can continue to improve upon it. It's fun. Building a business is fun. If there's anything more fun than that, I haven't found it yet.
I love that. We'll talk a little bit in a little bit about your latest entrepreneurial ventures, because you do find so much fun in starting these new
They're hard.
enterprises.
They're hard. It's hard work, but it is fun too.
So you were very mission driven in your efforts to start and scale Whole Foods Market. As you said, you hope to change the way people eat in America, champion the benefits of a healthy diet. But you were also unapologetic about making Whole Foods Market a profitable business. And that was how you were able to scale. Sometimes the mission driven education entrepreneurs I talk to can feel uneasy about the idea of making a profit or even taking a paycheck for their work. And of course, in startup days, sometimes paychecks aren't possible, but there should be a pathway to sort of financial sustainability. What would you say to these founders who are a bit uneasy about profit?
Well, first, a little backstory for myself on that before I answer that question. So, um, I think I was vaccinated against it more or less because I started in the co-op movement, and the food co-op movement was food for people, not for profit. I had been indoctrinated in college. I would have defined myself when I was 20, 21 years old as a democratic socialist. I thought business was greedy and selfish, and that socialists would be more just and more equal and fair for everybody. You'd have the experts running things, not these greedy business people. And on the other hand, being part of the co-op movement, both food and living in a housing co-op or a commune, yeah, the politics of it were astounding. I mean, the food co-ops were always trying to figure out, they were all very leftist, and they were trying to figure out who to boycott. They'd spend all their meeting time arguing about, we shouldn't be buying from this company because they've got uh, they're doing some bad stuff in Indonesia, so we shouldn't buy from them. Or these people are growing bananas from, I mean, really, we don't think they're taking good care of their workers. They don't have, and so they were boycotting so many different things, and that's what most of the discussions were about: who not to do business with. They weren't thinking about how do we give better value for our customers, how do we give a better experience. They were more interested in the politics, and so um, And then in the housing co-op, you're spend so much time arguing about trivial stuff, about also some boycott stuff, but then about chores and about who's going to cook and who's cleaning the bathrooms. And it was like, wow, this is just such a waste of time. I just don't want to spend all this time arguing about this stuff. And so when we started Safeway, I thought, we're not going to have all this. We're not going to have all this stuff about arguing about every single little detail. We're gonna build this business to serve our customers. And so the thing I realized, and Safeway didn't make money at first, making money was hard. Making a profit is not easy to do. It's very difficult. Most businesses don't. I mean, most businesses fail. And the challenge the food co-ops have always had is because they're controlled by the owners are their customers. So the customers they're not thinking long term. They're thinking about, we just want our prices to be as low as possible. We don't care if this thing grows any, just keep our prices down. But you have to make a profit in order to be able to plow it back in the business to help it grow, also to just innovate, to create new things. If you don't have capital to do that, you're just sort of stuck in the perpetual day-to-day grind that you're in every day. You can't progress. Capital's necessary. So I got that because I think I'd been in the opposite. It was like, well, and I also when I began to see how the stakeholders work, that they're sort of connected and interdependent. You have customers, employees, suppliers, investors, communities you're part of, and they're all kind of interdependent. It doesn't really matter who controls the business, whether you can have different kinds of co-ops. You can have a consumer co-op owned by the customers. You can have a workers co-op owned by the workers. You can have a suppliers co-op owned by the suppliers. We were also a co-op. We were just an investors co-op. And I got asked to speak several years ago to the National Federation of Food Co-ops. And this was after Whole Foods had grown and have become really big. In fact, Whole Foods was bigger than all the co-ops in the United States combined by several factors at that time. And I went up there and I said, hey, I'm glad to be back with my fellow co-opers. And I said, Whole Foods, we're an investors co-op. And I said, it doesn't really matter. You have to take care of each of the stakeholders. And you guys have been neglecting the profit side of the business. And that's why Whole Foods is more successful than you are, because I didn't. We were profitable and we invested the money and we grew, and you guys you struggled to grow because you haven't been willing to make any money. Of course, they hated me for saying that, right? I never got invited back to speak, but I said a very powerful, unpleasant truth to them. And so that's my message to all of the educators who feel guilty about money. Money is not, if you make a profit, you're not stealing that from anybody. You're creating value for people in your schools. You're educating students, and people are not being forced to go there. They're going there because it's in their best interest to go there, or they'd choose someplace else. And so if you're making a profit, you've earned it. You haven't stolen it. You deserve it. And by the way, if you can make a profit, it proves that your business model is good. And that's the way you could do the most good in the world. That's the beauty of capitalism. It takes the profits and it recycles them either back in investing in the business that you're in, or you can invest in other businesses. But all the other businesses also need capital. So growing the capital pool is essential to human progress. And so if you're not making any profits, you're kind of holding human progress back. If you have a good school, we need more of them. And how are you going to do it unless you can make money and reinvest it? So that's my message. I'm saying they have an ethical obligation, not only to themselves, but to the rest of the world, to become profitable so that they can grow and take their good educational ideas and share that with more students who need better education.
I love that. I want to dig deeper into your shift from commune member to capitalist. Probably my favorite passage from your book is when you're talking about capitalism, and you write, quote, "It astounded me how many people seem to be ignorant or in outright denial of what capitalism has done for humanity. My reading had convinced me beyond a doubt that economic freedom combined with free markets, property rights, the rule of law, and entrepreneurship, or the ability to have a go, as economic historian Deirdre McCloskey likes to say, is the greatest thing we as a species have ever created. The practice of these ideas has lifted billions and billions of people out of poverty in the last 250 years, created a large and sustained global middle class for the first time in history, forged a platform for ongoing technological innovation and economic growth, and helped establish levels of wealth and wellness unthinkable just a few generations ago. Simply put, it made the modern world possible. Wow, hear, hear. So, what do you say to people who dismiss capitalism's undeniably positive impact on human progress and prosperity, and may even look upon capitalism with disdain?
Well, I generally say a couple things to them. Usually they're ignorant of history. So I'll quote statistics to them that if you go back just 200 years ago, 94% of the people alive on the planet Earth lived on less than $2 a day, and 85% lived on less than $1 a day. And that's in today's dollars. So we were awash in poverty. The average lifespan 200 years ago was 30. The illiteracy rates, only 12% of the population in the world could read. Almost no one, very, very few people ever traveled more than 50 miles from where they were born. We didn't have modern dentistry. We did not have vaccinations. If you got a cut, you might have to have an amputation because of blood poisoning. There was no way to stop that except by amputating the limb. It was simply a horrible time to be alive. And people, they often compare, do we have problems in the world today? Absolutely, we do. And frankly, we always will. That's the nature of human nature. We're going to always have some problems. But compared by any objective measurements to how we lived in the past, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, I like to always ask this question to people. I'll give you any other time to be alive in the whole history of the human race. Tell me when humanity's had it better than right now. And the answer is, generally, they don't even answer it because they never even thought of that question before, but they can't ever name anything. And the second thing, they always want to hold up what I call an idealized socialism. And I try to nip that in the bud in two ways. I'll say, do you realize in the last 100 years, 41 countries have embraced socialism, and there have been 41 failures. And you can only make excuses for it for so long by saying, well, that one had Lenin and Stalin, this one had Mao, this one had Castro. We had these dictators, but they always does lead to that. Or if it's democratic, the people will vote him out of the office eventually because socialism doesn't create prosperity. If you stifle entrepreneurship and you don't allow the entrepreneurs to do their innovations, just having a bunch of bureaucrats running things, it's like going to the Department of Motor Vehicles. That's how the whole world is. It's like you queued up in line all the time and you start having scarcities and the whole standard of living, first it stagnates and then it begins to reverse. It doesn't take that long. So is capitalism perfect? Is it? No, of course not. It's just by far, far better than any other alternative humanity's ever come up with. In fact, I think capitalism's the greatest single thing that humanity has done. It's the greatest creation that humanity's ever done. It's made the modern world possible. And it's going to be, I say this is the best time to be alive in the history of humanity. But if you gave me a choice to be alive 100 years from now, I would take it in a heartbeat. It's going to be a lot better 100 years from now than it is today. The students of today will have unimagined benefits and prosperity and new types of life fulfillment that we can't even imagine or can barely begin to imagine today. So I'm very optimistic about the future. And that's why I don't understand why people are so scared. They're so frightened of the future. It's like, yeah, the future is going to be great. I mean, because as long as we can continue to have economic freedom and we allow innovations to occur, and are there problems? Sure. Well, that's your job. Your job as a young person is to go out and solve some of these problems through innovations, through new types of solutions that we can't think of today.
Just love that. So in addition to Being a capitalist, you also consider yourself a libertarian, as do I. We are both affiliated with the Cato Institute, and I'm a senior fellow at the Foundation for Economic Education, the country's oldest libertarian think tank, and the one that hosts this podcast. So, what does libertarianism mean to you, and how did you find your way to this political philosophy?
First I found myself towards economic freedom ultimately, because when I left the co-ops and I started my own business up, this was when Star Wars had just really first come out. I think when the Empire Strikes Back came back, and it's first the Star Wars, then Empire Strikes Back, I got nicknamed by the co-opers as Darth Vader in Austin. I was seen as a Jedi Knight who went over to the dark side, and now I was a prophet, a greedy profit monger. And of course, this was when Safer Way was, losing money. And, we were just trying to survive. And the idea that I was some kind of, evil person was absurd. I mean, business creates value it creates value for its customers. It's creating value for its employees. They have jobs, opportunities to grow. It's trading with suppliers. That's good for them. Business is this win-win-win game. It's not only not evil, it's really, really good. It creates so much value in the world. It's the greatest value creator the humanity's ever come up with. And capitalism is sort of a natural thing that happens if you just let it. It's what humans want to do, create and trade with each other. And if you just leave them alone, that's what they'll do. Not to say that all regulations are bad, but then some are very important and very good to, keep for one thing, to protect property rights and not just have the bullies and the ruthless people just steal it all from the people that are actually producing and creating it. But as I started to study about business and I think I encountered Milton Friedman's work. And then that was just a total eye opener for me. Capitalism and Freedom, when I first read that one, that was an awakening book. And I had read Ayn Rand when I was a teenager. So there were some seeds planted there from that, but I didn't have I'd gone on to college and been sort of indoctrinated, I suppose. And then after Friedman, I think I next encountered uh, Economics in One Lesson. That was a huge book for me as well. And then one of my friends that worked for me at Traferway was a libertarian named Gene. And Gene gave me a copy of the Laissez-Faire book catalog, which I then joked that I proceeded to read every single book in the catalog over the next few years as I just educated myself. And then I began to self-identify as a libertarian because it was about maximizing both personal and economic liberty. It's really I think that's what libertarianism means to me. It's about the highest political value is liberty, both personal liberty and economic liberty. And I think libertarian now has been, I oftentimes will not self-identify that. I'll self-identify as a classical liberal, since Hayek and von Mises, I do identify with the classical liberal values, because the enemies of freedom, they try to brand libertarianism as something on the right, that it's, type of fascism or Nazism. And of course, that's ridiculous. It's against all types of authoritarianism. And but the brand has been attacked. And so if I embrace it, sometimes people begin to deal with me not as a libertarian, but as some kind of Trumpian authoritarian person. And so libertarianism's got to do something to rectify its brand, or people need to self-identify in some other way. I'm really worried about the brand not meaning what we intend it to mean.
Well, hopefully we can do some brand renewal then to let people know sort of the promise of libertarianism and its focus on individual freedom, limited government, free markets, and peace. That sort of are the
Left out
premise.
peace, but that's definitely an important value of libertarianism.
Yeah. So you stepped down as CEO of Whole Foods Market in 2022 after overseeing the company's acquisition by Amazon. You are now 70 years old and your entrepreneurial ambitions are far from over. You have a new startup that you're working on called Love.Life. Tell us about this next great adventure of yours.
Well, um, it's actually it's an idea that I've had going way back. I hint at it in the whole story in the book when I talked about we almost created back in 1985, we almost created a business called LifeWorks, and it was going to be I'm very interested in human flourishing. I'm very interested in humans flourishing physically, emotionally, and spiritually. I really do believe that, and frankly, this is where a lot of what Love.Life is going to do is overlapping with the education side, because for actually human flourishing, people have got to become learners. They have to become more effective. They have to be, their curiosity has to be encouraged and stoked, not dump a bump of water on, put the flame out when you're young. And so Love.Life, there's many components to it. Like we have a telehealth business that's operational right now in all 50 states. You can have a doctor at Love.Life that's going to be focused more on not just prescribing drugs, but helping you to be the healthiest version of yourself. We have a online coaching business called Mastering Diabetes and Mastering Weight Loss, where people can if they're dealing with diabetes or obesity, we can help them. We can coach them to master those diseases, both of them. But the thing I'm most excited about is we're launching just a few weeks from now on July 9th, our very first flagship location in LA area, in the beach cities in El Segundo, just south of the airport of Los Angeles. And it's an old Best Buy. It's located right next to a Whole Foods Market, one of the most successful Whole Foods Market stores in Southern California. I had the advantage of knowing all of Whole Foods' best stores, and probably we'll try to get Love.Life as close to them as possible because there's such a good customer overlap. But in this big 45,000 square foot location, we're going to have a healthy restaurant, healthy food restaurant. We're going to have a state-of-the-art fitness center. We're going to have a really wonderful spa. We'll have all types of recovery modalities. We're going to have a playful aspect to it because we're going to have pickleball. We'll have yoga classes. We're going to have Pilates. We're going to have, but the big part of it that makes it unusual is that it's also a medical center. So we will have doctors that are trained in functional, integrative. They're medical doctors trained in functional, integrative, and lifestyle medicine. And the whole idea is, let's say, Carrie, you were to become a member, then if we start out by wanting you to take a number of tests so that we could begin to get an idea of what your baseline is. And from once that baseline is, we can then urge you to go different directions. You might, if you have a disease, then we want to put you on a platform. First, before we can get you to optimum health, we need to reverse this disease. Most medicine doesn't really reverse diseases. I mean, they just deal with symptoms. They really do. Unless you have a bacterial infection where an antibiotic will work, almost all the other drugs are simply managing your symptoms, not curing you. Most people don't understand that. But we know how to reverse heart disease. We know how to reverse obesity. We know how to reverse diabetes. We know how to reverse most autoimmune diseases, in fact. Only we don't do it. It's not, there's a lot of reasons why we wouldn't do it. It might take me too far afield to critique the whole health system, so I won't do it at this point. So what Love.Life wants to do is once we have your baseline, then we can create a personalized precision plan for you. Our doctor will work with a health coach, you'll work with them, and we'll begin to help you. And also we'll want you to measure yourself constantly with the wearables. The data that we can now gather from things like Apple Watches and Oura Rings is astounding. Continuous glucose monitors, if you have blood sugar spikes, we can monitor this. We're creating a technology that all this data, all your testing will be on this platform, and you can track your progress. And we want to help your physical health, your emotional health, but also your spiritual health. So we will be teaching meditation classes. We will be teaching yoga. We'll be doing breath work. And eventually, when it's legalized in California, we will do psychedelic therapy when it's legal. It's legal in Colorado and Oregon now. So that's kind of the Love.Life vision. It's to help everybody to be the healthiest version of themselves. And people say, I would like to have done the first one in Austin because I live there, but we couldn't find a great location there. And also, this idea won't work in Los Angeles. It won't work. So, because LA is so interested in all aspects of health, looking good, feeling good. And it's a very, very potentially a great market for us. So we'll see.
That's great. And so the website is Love.Life for anyone
Yes,
who wants to
not
follow.
love.life.com, just love.life.
That's so great. And I love that you are focusing more on personalized healthcare and kind of technology enabled tools that enable that personalization. I think we're starting to see that in education. We're starting to have some personalization and individualization in education like we have elsewhere. And certainly you're trying to make that happen in healthcare and in personal wellness. So it'd be great to see what happens there. So as we begin to wrap up, I'd love to talk a little bit more broadly about American entrepreneurship. So since 2020, after years of stagnation, more people are starting new businesses. Much of this momentum is being fueled by women and people of color who are launching businesses at record rates. What do you think are some of the best ways we can encourage and support entrepreneurship?
I mean, it's interesting because I've experienced not only for myself personally, but this whole business that I've been in for 44, 45 years before I retired, I saw so much entrepreneurship there, and Whole Foods enabled it. Part of the key to entrepreneurship is Whole Foods created a platform that enabled entrepreneurship in agriculture and food manufacturing. You had the whole local food economies began to explode. There were no there was, as far as I knew, if we go back about 40 years ago, there was maybe one or two farmers markets in the entire United States because there was no local agriculture. When we got Whole Foods going back in Austin, we didn't have any local growers. There were zero, none. Or they were just little gardeners and they weren't selling for the commercial market. But once we were willing to buy, once we created a platform that enabled entrepreneurship to grow. And then you have farm to table restaurants now. And I mean, just think about this for a moment. I want to try to give you a scale of how the world's changed in 40 years from now. When I was 40 years ago, the wine, it came from California, really. That's about the only place we were growing grapes and creating wine in the United States. A little bit in Virginia, maybe. But now it's everywhere. Everybody that can grow grapes is growing grapes, and you have all these local wines. The only kind of beer that was being produced when I was young was from Budweiser, Schlitz, Pabst Blue Ribbon, Old Milwaukee, just all these sort of lagers that there were no stouts, there were no pilsners, there were no ales, there were no IPAs, they didn't exist. And there's this explosion now of craft beers that and it's and now non-alcoholic beers, for example, in the Whole Foods, I heard recently that about 10% of Whole Foods' beer sales are now non-alcoholic beers. So that really hardly even existed. So you've had all this innovations occurring, partly because platforms for being able to sell it became available. So for entrepreneurs, one of the things I do when I speak at a lot of business schools, or I have in the past, and if I'm talking to business schools and MBA programs, I generally ask this interesting question. I'll ask everyone, I'll say, so how many of you plan to start your own business someday? Now that can vary from school to school, but most of the time I get approximately 3/4 of the people raise their hand, right? And then I ask the second question, well, how many of you are going to do it immediately after you leave here? Very few people's hands stay up because they're getting these massive offers from Goldman Sachs and Amazon and Google, and, starting them at $250,000 a year plus a signing bonus. They've got student debt they have to pay off. And so they have an entrepreneurial dream, but it's a dream. They're not directly pursuing it. Whereas take my case, I never graduated from college. Steve Jobs never graduated from college. Bill Gates never graduated from college. Michael Dell never graduated from college because these entrepreneurs just had to get going on it. Usually you feel called to your entrepreneurship and you just want to get going on it. Entrepreneurs, if you study them psychologically, they tend to be doers. they also tend to have worked and earned money when they were young. And if you start asking people that are entrepreneurs, you'll find, yeah, they started earning money at a very young age and they liked it. And they liked the freedom they gave. And then they started thinking about how I can earn more money. And so the entrepreneurship kind of flowed from that. So I don't know how to encourage entrepreneurs. I do think that the only thing I can say is that if you feel an urge to do it, you should pursue it. I honestly believe that every one of us is called. I believe in the hero's journey, and I think everyone's called to a hero's journey, but most people are too scared to answer that call. They feel it. They feel that tug, but they're so afraid they're going to fail, or that people are going to poke fun at them, or that they're going to somehow or another, their parents are going to disapprove, or their friends are going to judge them, and so they don't do it, and they always regret it because they'll always wonder what might have happened. So if you feel that urge to be an entrepreneur, just go for it. Follow your heart. Life's an adventure. You just don't want to get back to the end of your life and have a lot of regrets because I wish I'd done that. Instead, I remember my mother more than anything. She wanted me to be a doctor, and I was pre-med for a little while. It bored me to death. I just couldn't stand it. So I'm not going to be a doctor. And I got interested, and I just started following my own curiosity, and that led me in my own life adventure. So if the education programs that a lot of your people that you are working with are doing their jobs right, they're stoking children's curiosity and seeing that there's this incredible, massively interesting world and universe to explore. And if children are encouraged to explore it, they're going to find their passions taking them in certain directions. Some of those directions will be entrepreneurial. And but they have to have, it's kind of up to the educators to not, it's a good educator will ignite people's curiosity and their passion. A bad one puts it out. And public schools have been putting out curiosity of young people for a long, long time. So entrepreneurs they're partly born, but they can be encouraged, and they can be fed.
And I think one of the ways to encourage entrepreneurs is to listen to inspiring stories like yours, to help them know it's possible and that they can work through that fear, to really follow their dreams and that
I think
urge to
so.
build.
I'm going to recommend a podcast that the listeners consider listening to if they have an interest in. And the name of this podcast is called Founders.
Yes.
And this guy David Sindra, he's done like 400 podcasts. All of these books are biographies of founders, of entrepreneurs, of creators. I mean, they're not all business entrepreneurs, but they're all the most creative people that entrepreneurs are inherently creative. But you can have a biography on Ben Franklin and Albert Einstein that are certainly worth reading. But those podcasts themselves are incredibly inspiring. But after listening to a lot of those podcasts, I want to read the book myself. So I've been devouring all of these biographies of these creative entrepreneurs, and it definitely it's very inspiring. And so I would encourage people that have an entrepreneurial bent to consider listening to that podcast.
Great recommendation. And again, I'd also recommend your book, The Whole Story: Adventures in Love, Life, and Capitalism. My listeners and viewers can get a copy wherever books are sold, as well as at Whole Foods Market. And if you'd
Amazon.
and Amazon, yes. And if you'd like to follow John's story, his website is johnpmackey.com. Again, the new startup is Love.Life. And you can also follow John on Instagram and LinkedIn. John Mackey, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Carrie, thanks so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure talking with you.